As far as overall management of the project, because you guys are headquartered in Minnesota, right?
Right.
So you have all these different projects all across America where you're at. So who now handles you don't place an office in every city?
No. We don't, and that's a very good question. The question is about management. We hire a local project manager who is responsible for collecting the rents, doing the income check and the credit check on prospective tenants, is responsible for things like making sure that the sidewalks are shoveled in the wintertime and whatever, all of the things that you would associate with a management company. We tend to look for management companies that have experience with affordable housing, and we love it when we find one that's flexible, because in our buildings the tenants are likely to hang pictures on the hallways, and that freaks out some management companies, because you're not supposed to put your pictures there. Well, we don't mind that. We kind of encourage that. And don't put something that people are going to trip over, but it's a community, and so we look for a local management company, and sometimes it takes us 1 or 2 to find it.
And if there's a person available, also a resident manager, so there's an immediate response to a problem in a building, so they don't have to, if something happens on Friday at 5 o'clock, they hang out on Monday to get to an Airspace person, and that way they have the first person in the building. And if that doesn't work, they've got someone locally that they can get an answer from, who then can interface with us back in Minneapolis to get the solution.
Right, and every building has an asset manager assigned who's on the Airspace staff, and so that person will come out and visit the project typically 4 times a year. And if there are significant problems, it might be more often than that.
How many are on the staff, would you say?
We got what, 35, something like that. Yeah, right. We most of us are in Minneapolis. We have a full-time employee in an office in Seattle. We have a full-time employee in New York. And Los Angeles. Full-time employee in Los Angeles. So we are Midwestern. To our roots. Yes.
To answer the question about the rent, so a single person in LaPorte County at 60% of area median income, which is the highest threshold that you can get into a Section 42 housing, is 60% of the area median income. A single person at 60% in this county right now can make no more than $24,480 to qualify. So if you make above that, you can't live in the building.
Well, your question was about rent.
Right, and then, so if you look at a 1-bedroom in this marketplace, in this county, a 1-bedroom between 40 and 60% would go anywhere between $412 a month to $630 a month. And that's the highest threshold that HUD will allow us to charge.
We can
typically
charge
we
less.
never realize that. We typically are under those thresholds. And that does account for a $25 utility allowance.
So the utilities are billed separately to each tenant?
Yes. And this just accounts for $25 a month.
And we can charge less, though. That's just the maximum. That's just the median.
HUD says you can't go over
this. We can't charge more than that. We can charge less. But again, the less we charge, the less mortgage we can afford, which means the more money we have to be able to get in up front, and so it's always this balance. The other thing is he gave you a range. A 60% project will bring in the most revenue from rents, but it might not be the most competitive when you're going for tax credits to pay for it. So sometimes we would have some of those units be 50% units or 40% units, which means they're more low income than the other, and the people who live there will pay less in rent, which means we can't take as big a mortgage, but we get more money up front from the tax credits. So it's like a balloon. Wherever you push it, and one push it in, it goes out somewhere else. Yes, sir.
A lot of the buildings that you showed were tall, multi-story, 4 or 5 stories, stuff like that. Michigan City only has a few looking at short. Is that still feasible for your project?
Well, sure, because we're not necessarily looking at a large project. We're not necessarily looking at a building. We could be looking at a vacant site. We do new construction. We used to think historic preservation was such a great thing, but it's getting harder and harder to find really nice historic buildings that haven't been snapped up by commercial developers. So yeah, we do new construction, and again, we strive for the high ceilings and the big windows and the nice open spaces that you see in older buildings. Frequently do concrete floors. We're not fussy about it. Yeah, artists tend to create their own spaces, their own homes out of their spaces.
The first 25 units looks like about 45,000 square feet, just so in your head you can imagine what 25 units compressed into a building for artists looks like on average 45 to 50,000 square feet. Because our units are bigger, our units typically have 200 extra square feet in them for the accommodation of that studio space in addition to the living space. They also have wider corridors, hallways, bigger elevators, a community gathering space that doubles as that gallery. We are a little bit higher on our cost per square footage, but it's because we're accommodating for those things that you wouldn't find in a market rate kind of unit.
I was wondering about the distinction between like an artist and a non-artist. Like you said, a poet can come in. Does a certain amount of your revenue have to be generated through your art to make it, or do you guys keep track of the output that they do once they're in the?
That's a really great question.
Good
you know
question.
what? 95% of our residents, and maybe even higher, do not derive the majority of their income from their artwork. They are out in the community working right alongside the rest of you. You know, in New York, they're bike messengers, and they're probably waiters and waitresses. And sometimes, I said this example earlier, my parents were teachers for many years, and so sometimes our teachers aren't paid enough, and they fall into those categories as well. And so they're people just like you, but they are passionate about this creative energy that they have, and they want to live together in this building and have that synergy together.
And in the selection process, when we first fill up a building, we use a committee of artists who are not candidates to live in the building, typically because they own their own homes or they make too much money to qualify. And we ask them to judge the commitment to the art and the art form rather than the quality of the work or the art form. So if for example, we have painters and sculptors on the selection committee, and somebody comes in and he's a canoe maker, which we have had, they can't say, no, you're not an artist, you're an artisan, you don't qualify. They don't do that. But they might, for example, say, you're not really serious about what you do because you say you're a painter, but you haven't brought any paintings. You say you're a writer, but it's been 20 years since you wrote anything. So they look for a commitment. They don't judge quality. Some artists think they should, but they don't. And we don't get into that thing. Yes, sir.
Have any of the communities that you've worked with and put up projects come up with assistance like paying for the moving costs to move into the space?
I think the only thing that's ever happened along those lines was when the city of Minneapolis paid us $4.5 million to move the Schubert Theater 2 blocks. and that was a big time payment, but we spent it all on moving. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about ownership structures in the properties that you develop?
Since the residential projects that we do are all Section 42 housing, Section 42 housing is based only for rental housing. So all of the units that we develop, the residential units, are rental. And we do no condominium housing of any kind. On some projects, we we have a different kind of structure. If I'm going to give you the example of Everett, Washington, which is not yet under construction, but we're in this project with the Arts Council of Snohomish County, and they want a new Arts Council office with some education spaces and so forth. And so what we're doing is we're doing one building, I think it's 5 stories, 4 stories, and the upper stories will be residential housing owned and operated by Airspace. We'll condominiumize it, if I may use that awful word, and the ground floor will be owned and operated by the Arts Council. One building, 2 owners.